So that's John Mason expelled from the SNP. There is an appeals process. Will he appeal? I guess he might do, but I would be very confident in predicting that if he does appeal, it won't be successful. I think he is out for good. But the reason he's out is that if they hadn't kicked him out, there would have been hell to pay, using that term advisedly, among SNP supporters who would have been outraged by such a decision. And if they've kicked him out and then they change their mind on appeal, then there'd be 2 times hell to pay. So I really cannot imagine that the party is going to readmit him. I think that's extremely unlikely. But anyway, I might be wrong, but that's my prediction. So why is he being expelled? You're probably familiar with the story. He said he believed Israel wasn't committing genocide in Gaza. Normal definition of genocide, roughly speaking, deliberate mass killing in order to eliminate a whole people group. There are weaker definitions, but that's the principal understanding of the term, I think. Now, John Mason said he thinks that doesn't apply to Israel's actions, though he does say he thinks their actions have been excessive, disproportionate, but he doesn't think genocide is the right word to use. So there's not an extreme position at all to take, but it's got him kicked out of the SNP. And that's because the SNP is anti-Semitic. A very broad vein of anti-Semitism runs through the SNP. Where does it come from? Well, I'm going to talk straight here. Right, number one, there's a lot of Muslims in the SNP, and a significant proportion of Muslims are anti-Semitic. Now, the reason I say that is you look at other conflicts around the world where there are Muslims on the receiving end of mistreatment. Muslims in the UK and around the world, okay, they might have some sort of empathy for them or some sort of relationship, some sort of loyalty with them, but it's not particularly strong. But then when it comes to Israel and Palestine, then it becomes a major, major, major issue. So in other words, the key thing in Palestine isn't that it's Muslims being mistreated. The key issue is it's Muslims being mistreated and the people on the other side are mainly Jews. That's my reasoning to see that as anti-Semitism. Now, I think Hamza Yousaf, we've got a classic case of that. His response to this is driven by tribal allegiance rather than any logic. The Israeli attack on Hezbollah terrorists who were firing rockets into Israel, where Israel basically rigged it so that their personal electronic devices would explode. So an explosion basically right next to the person that they're aiming for. And Hamza Yousaf described that as an indiscriminate attack. He's completely lost the plot over this issue. I'm so glad he's not First Minister anymore. Right, before I move on though, let me make it clear that at some points in the past, very significant portions of church history, anti-Semitism was extremely prevalent in the Christian church. It was a very serious problem, quite an embarrassment to the history of the church. And there are some parts of the world where anti-Semitism is a problem in the church today. So there's just a bit of a balance. Right, where else does the anti-Semitism in the SNP come from? Well, it comes from the sort of left-wing or hard-left ideology, which ends up with the conclusion that we're on the side of the oppressed and the weak. So whoever's weak in a situation, they must be good. Whoever's powerful or strong, they must be bad. That's not a moral system, but that's the way they look at some world issues. Right, another factor in the SNP is anti-Semitism. I mean, it's bizarre to even talk about this. I mean, in Scotland, around Glasgow, in particular, the idea that there's Celtic, which is sort of Catholic and nationalist. There's Rangers that is unionist and Protestant. And another thing that goes along with Celtic is being pro-Palestine. Another thing that goes along with Rangers is being pro-Israel. I mean, it should be pretty obvious, shouldn't it? Anyone whose view on international affairs is formed with reference to the football team they support, well, something's gone seriously wrong in their thinking process. Let's just put it that way. So that's a significant part of it as well. Then also in the SNP, there have been repeated incidents over the years of SNP supporters, representatives, sharing on social media just good old-fashioned anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. You know, the Jews are controlling everything, the banks are controlling everything, they're pulling all the strings, this sort of thing. I mean, so it's all there within the SNP. It's a very significant influence within it. So John Mason has offended against this orthodoxy within the SNP, and as a result, they have thrown him out. So, but that's not the only reason. There's other reasons in the background as well. John Mason opposed same-sex marriage. He's pro-life. He's the only pro-life MSP. I'd say that with absolute confidence. John Mason is the one and only pro-life MSP. Every other MSP is pro-abortion. Basically, it's as simple as that. If anyone wants to come and argue with me about that, then sure, put something on social media. Tell me that you want to see abortion stopped, and I'll maybe change that statement. Are you opposed to buffer zone legislation, the one MSP who did that? So there's other reasons as well why a significant number of people who are the mainstream of the SNP basically would like to see him gone. Now, over the years, John Mason's spoken his mind on lots of issues. I wouldn't say he's spoken his mind on as many issues as he might have done, so he's chosen some issues to speak about, but he does it in a very gentle, measured and non-confrontational way. And he's been absolutely slated for doing so, particularly in that left-wing media, because they're very hostile to his views, by a substantial proportion of the SNP independent supporters, again, because they're just very hostile to his views. And then in the more right-wing press, where you might think there might be a bit of sympathy for his views, but that tends to be unionist press, and so they attack him because it's an opportunity to attack a nationalist. So we really just get it from all sides. It was quite remarkable. But anyway, but through it all, John Mason has remained, and even now still seems to be remaining, loyal to the SNP. Now, some people might say, or maybe he's going to appeal the decision, so he has to say that. He's trying to stay on side to see if they'll let him back in. I really don't think he'll be thinking about it tactically. I really do think he still feels loyalty to the SNP. He still feels part of that tribe, if you like. Now, it reminds me of Thomas More, the 16th century English figure, who fell out with Henry VIII because Thomas More stuck to his principles. And basically, Henry VIII had him executed. And Thomas More's last words on the scaffold were, "I die the king's good servant and God's first." I die the king's good servant. So the king is having him executed, and just before he dies, he's like still declaring his allegiance to the king. It's really bizarre, isn't it? Now, in a sense, that sort of loyalty is admirable. It's admirable in that case. It was combined with patriotism. The king was the embodiment of the nation. But with any organisation, have a network of relationships within it, and showing some sort of loyalty, as I say, it is admirable. It is a virtue. But why is it the case with John Mason at this point, even when they were threatening to expel him, even now they have expelled him, he still seems to be thinking, this is the party for me, and I want to be in it. So why is that? I've got some theories about why that might be. Theory number one. John Mason thinks the SNP is united by a single aim, Scottish independence. That's what comes first. That's my ultimate allegiance. That's what the SNP's ethos is all about. So I'm for independence, they're for independence, we're still on the same team, so I want to be able to come and play for you. I want to be wearing your strip, playing on your side. So though John, in this case, if this is what he was thinking, John Mason would be thinking, well, the SNP may be anti-Semitic, they may kill the unborn, 150,000 of them since the Scottish government, SNP, formed the Scottish government for the first time. They may corrupt children and sexualise children at school, but these are side issues. These are minor side issues. The real important issue that we unite around is independence. Independence covers a multitude of sins. We can overlook grave evils, but unite for independence. Now, that sort of thinking, I would say that's independence as an idol. Let's put it that way. It's like saying some things are right and wrong, but there's a higher thing as well. There's something above and beyond right and wrong, and that's Scottish independence. So Scottish independence is the most important thing. Then what's right and wrong? Well, that comes along later. So, do I think John Mason is a Scottish independence idolater? No, I don't. I don't think that's the way he thinks. Okay, so let's look at some other angles then. Now, going back to Thomas More, when he said he was still sort of pro-king, if you like, being pro-king was being patriotic. It wasn't that the king was the one who got elected last time. He was the embodiment of the nation. So for Thomas More, accepting the authority of the king was just being patriotic. But the SNP is not a nation. The SNP is a political party that has policies. And the way it works as in a democracy is people vote for parties on the basis of their policies. Now, someone in the SNP, they might say, well, people vote for the SNP just because they want independence. That's the only reason they vote for SNP. So the SNP gets elected, and then the SNP can just go around go ahead and run the country the way it sees fit. And John Mason could say something like, okay, the SNP gets elected because people want independence. Then once we're elected, we run the country, and I want to be involved in that decision making. I want to be a good influence within that government in order to run the country well. And I would say that's not the case. That's a misrepresentation of the actual situation within a democracy. The SNP does not just say, we're for independence, vote for us, and then when we get elected, we'll decide how we're going to run the country. It doesn't work like that. The SNP, like other parties, they put forward a manifesto. They say, this is how we're going to run the country, and they go into great detail in lots of different areas, and people vote for them on that particular basis. Now, I suspect this is the reason why John Mason thinks he still should be loyal to the SNP. And I would guess the view that John Mason holds, it's a very widespread view. It's the mainstream view, but I think it's wrong. And this view is that you can disconnect yourself from the policies of your party. If you disagree with the policy of your party, then you're not responsible for the enactment of that policy. So if you say, let's say John Mason were to say, vote for us, vote for the SNP. He said that doesn't mean that I'm endorsing their policies. And if you vote for the SNP, that doesn't really mean that you're endorsing their policies. It's like saying, okay, my party does have some terrible policies, does some terrible things, is home to some sinister ideologies, but you still should vote for it. And when you vote for it, you won't really be endorsing these policies. You see, I support this party and I don't endorse them. So when you vote for them, you won't be endorsing them either. I just think that whole way of thinking is just wrong. I think if you vote for a party, if you join a party, if you campaign on behalf of a party, if you represent a party, then you're commending that party to other people. Therefore, you're endorsing their policies. Now, at this point, of course, someone comes along and says, oh, but I support such and such a party, but I don't agree with their policy on this. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. You might not agree with that policy, but you're still commending it. You're still endorsing it. You're still encouraging people to vote for it, to vote for a party that will do it. So there's not this sort of opt-out clause that most people seem to think that there is. So for John Mason, is independence an idol? No, I don't think it is. But I think he does think that you can support the SNP and not support their policies. It's as though, John Mason said, this is the general view as well. It's as though there's some sort of conscientious objection, some sort of get-out clause that means you can say, vote SNP doesn't mean vote for abortion. Whereas I would say it absolutely does. Vote SNP equals vote for abortion. Vote SNP equals vote for the SNP's manifesto. If you don't agree with part of the manifesto, then that doesn't matter. Your vote, you've put that cross next to the SNP, which means you're endorsing the manifesto that they've put forward. Now, as I say, I'm guessing that's what John Mason would think, and it's a very widely held view. And I would love to debate someone on this issue, not just a few backwards and forwards comments, but actually debate it to the bitter end and get to the heart of the matter. But I just can't find anyone to do that. I wish someone would come from another party, or maybe someone even not in another party, debate this issue with me. Let's do it on a live stream or something and see where we end up. Now, I think from the SNP's point of view, they've got their tactic. Their tactic in the past has been, if we use the pro-life case as an illustration, then if we have John Mason in the party, he's pro-life, that will help keep pro-life people voting for a pro-abortion party. And as the SNP, who do you want to vote for you? Everyone. As a political party, do you want people who hate your values or to vote for you? Yes. Do you want people whose values you hate to vote for you? Yes. You want everyone to vote for you. Even if you totally disagree with them and you go in completely the opposite direction that they want, you still want them to vote for you. You want every vote you can get. So the SNP might look at John Mason, might have looked at him in the past and said, okay, we completely disagree with him, but he keeps certain people on board, and that's good. And John Mason makes the same argument. He says the SNP should be a broad party. That's the way we will maximise our support. In other words, allow me in, and that will keep pro-life people voting for a pro-abortion party, which is not something I think is a positive thing to achieve. But I think through this case, John Mason has surely now learned that the SNP is not a group of people who are just united by Scottish independence. That's not what the SNP is. The SNP has very definite core values. One of them is anti-Semitism. Other ones have been pro-abortion, etc. And that's resulted in John being kicked out. Now, at this point, I always say this, when someone's in hot water, where it's possible, I want to stand up for them and say, I agree with them, they're being mistreated. So I'll do that right now. What John Mason said, I believe was true, and the SNP has been wrong in what it's done to him. So I'd ask, I haven't been to check their social media because I'm so confident there's going to be nothing there. But Kate Forbes, how about just a supportive post on X? Murdo Fraser? I know he's in another party, but if you support John Mason, that's a way of having a go at the SNP, isn't it? Jeremy Balfour, how about a quick post on X supporting John Mason? Might we manage that? How about some of the Jewish organisations? How about the Jewish organisation that utterly ridiculously accused John Mason of anti-Semitism a few months ago? Going to come out with a positive statement about him? Probably not. I do find it frustrating how unwilling people are to stand up for the person in the firing line. I find it very, very frustrating. Whereas my policy is that every opportunity to do that, you just do it publicly, automatically, routinely. And I think the more people have that policy, then I think the more difficult it will be to mistreat people for speaking unpopular opinions. So there's two things that can happen in this sort of case. Number one, speak unpopular truths and you pay the price. That's certainly true, isn't it? Number two, join or stay in a party that hates your principles and you'll pay a price for that as well. So what's happened to John Mason? Has he spoken unpopular truths and paid the price, or has he joined and stayed in a party that hates his principles and paid the price for that? Which is it? Well, it's quite simple. It's both. It's both. So, do join us at our conference on the 9th of November in Glasgow. There's a link below to get your tickets. I would love to see you there.